Thinking about how an extinct animal lived is an integral part of the science of paleontology. Reconstructing the behaviours of these ancient organisms is an important next step once the anatomy and evolutionary relationships have been determined, and can enable us to gain a much greater understanding of what life throughout deep time was like. Watching things such as Jurassic Park and Walking with Dinosaurs while growing up and being fascinated with paleontology, I'd always wondered how exactly we knew what these long-dead creatures would behave like, and why the creators had chosen to portray them in certain ways. Well, although many of the examples of dinosaur and other extinct animal behaviours shown in Walking with Dinosaurs, and Jurassic Park especially, are largely fictional or sometimes inferred through educated guesswork, if we're lucky we do occasionally find direct evidence for prehistoric animal behaviour preserved in the fossil record, locked in time for millions and millions of years. Such fossils come in a variety of forms, from trace fossils to body fossils to combinations of both. From scrape marks created during a dinosaur sex dance, to a herd of brontotheres killed as they tried to cross a river, and the final complete death march of a 150 million year old horseshoe crab, these fossils are diverse and remarkable findings. In this video, we're going to be exploring 5 different examples of such discoveries, but if you're interested in learning about more fossils like these, then I'd highly recommend reading my friend Dr. Dean Lomax's new book, Locked in Time, in which he explores 50 extraordinary fossils that preserve evidence of prehistoric behaviour and what they can tell us about these animals and ancient life on our planet. The 5 examples featured in this video are all entries from Locked in Time, so for even more like this, do be sure to read this incredible book. I'll talk more about it at the end, but for now let's take a look at 5 prehistoric moments frozen in time. Number 1. Mayacetus. As many of you may know, I'm a big fan of whales. This might be obvious from the in-depth 2-part series I did on their evolution a while ago and the various other videos since, and to me the evidence of their macroevolutionary history and transition from land back to water is one of the most fascinating parts of paleontology. One of the early families of prehistoric cetaceans was a group called the protocetids, predatory animals that have been recovered from marine rocks but still possess limbs that were capable of supporting terrestrial locomotion. Therefore, these were most likely amphibious mammals that would hunt and feed in the water, but then come back to the land for other purposes, such as resting. The protocetids, and indeed other groups of ancient cetaceans, were fascinating and diverse organisms, and clearly whale evolution is not exactly as simple as a straight line of progressive transition from terrestrial ancestors to fully marine descendants, instead being a complex branching of lineages as various ancient cetaceans radiated out to fill different niches. But still, it's remarkable that we can get an idea of what the lifestyles and behaviours of these early relatives of the biggest animals alive today were like. One such glimpse into these ancient whales' behaviour was revealed in 2009 with the description of a newly discovered species of protocetid, Mayacetus inuus. This cetacean was named based on 2 skeletons of adult individuals that were found in Middle Eocene-aged rocks in Pakistan, but the absolutely incredible thing is that one of these adults was discovered to contain the skull and parts of the skeleton of a fetus. This is so far the only fossil of a prehistoric cetacean fetus to have been found, and it tells us a lot about the lifestyle and reproductive behaviours of these ancient animals. Firstly, the fact that only one large fetus is present allowed paleontologists to determine that, like almost all instances in cetaceans alive today, Mayacetus would have given birth to a single calf. Secondly, the advanced development of the fetus, with mineralised permanent molars already in place, suggests that like marine mammals around today, these protocetids gave birth to precocial young that were already capable of supporting themselves to an extent, easily able to move around and potentially even catch their own food not long after birth. The major difference between Mayacetus and living whales, though, is in the orientation of the fetus. In modern cetaceans, the young are born tail first, so that their heads are still inside their mother's body for most of the process and therefore reducing the likelihood of them drowning as they are born. However, in Mayacetus, the fossil fetus is positioned so that it would have exited the birth canal head first. As a clearly semi-aquatic organism, the fact that the calves were born head first is a very strong indication that these prehistoric whales would have returned to the land in order to give birth. This is perhaps not a surprising revelation, but the fact that we have direct evidence of the reproductive habits of these early cetaceans is a truly remarkable thing. It should also be noted that some objections to the interpretation of this fossil representing a fetus were made, with some instead considering the smaller skeleton to be the last meal of the adult. However, the fetus interpretation seems to be much better supported by the available evidence. This glimpse into how protocetids such as Mayacetus gave birth is a true testament to how remarkable the fossil record can be sometimes. We now know what part of the life history of these animals was like, allowing for reconstructions to be made of these ancient organisms giving birth to their large, advanced calves on rocky coastlines. Prehistoric moments we can say with almost complete certainty must have happened thanks to this amazing fossil find. 2. Cetacosaurus Babysitter. Extinct non-bird dinosaurs are often the stars of any media involving prehistoric animals, and very often they're portrayed as vicious killing machines that lived in a brutal, primitive, and unforgiving world. This is not always true of all dinosaur media, to be fair, but it is frequently seen. However, you may be surprised to know that evidence of altruism, when an individual helps others without there being any clear benefit to themselves, is known in the fossil record of dinosaurs. It's difficult to know for sure when a certain fossil association between individuals might be evidence of such a behaviour, but there's a particular specimen of the basal ceratopsian Cetacosaurus that very well may show that these dinosaurs displayed altruism. The story of this specimen is a long and fairly controversial one, with a few different papers having been published on it. First described in 2004 from early Cretaceous rocks in China, the specimen comprises a bone bed of around 34 almost complete juveniles that all appear to be about the same age, together with a much larger Cetacosaurus that was interpreted as the parent, an incredible discovery of parental care in these dinosaurs. However, a later analysis of the specimen claimed that it was in fact a composite, with the larger individual having been added on artificially by the collectors in order to enhance the value of the fossils. Additionally, this study only counted 24 juveniles that definitely genuinely belonged together, as well as finding that the larger skull was from an individual that's too young to be the parent, being aged about 4 or 5, despite Cetacosaurus only reaching sexual maturity at age 8 or 9. But then, not long after, another study re-examined the specimen and concluded that the larger individual did indeed belong with the group and had not been added on after the fossils were excavated. So this is a genuine association between numerous very young baby Cetacosaurus and an older one. However, the fact that the older individual was still too young to have been the parent led the paleontologists to infer that this may have been an example of an older sibling of some of these youngsters essentially babysitting their group. Instead of parental care, this was post-hatching cooperation, with a possibly related older juvenile being trusted to take care of a group of babies, which were probably the offspring of a few different parents. A comparison with modern-day meerkats comes to mind when considering this fossil, seeing as these mammals employ the same strategy today. But clearly in this prehistoric case, the outcome of the babysitting was a devastating one. The Cetacosaurus bones are all preserved in volcaniclastic rocks, but since the microstructure of the bones do not display any damage from intense heat, it led the researchers to conclude that this group of young dinosaurs must have been killed when a lahar, a mudflow composed of volcanic material, perhaps triggered by heavy rainfall, suddenly came surging down a valley, drowning and burying the babysitter and the infants they were looking after. It's an incredibly sad moment in time forever preserved in the fossil record, but one that enables a very rare impression of the potential social structure of these animals. The fact that an ancient tragedy such as this can also allow us to gain an even greater understanding of the family life of a long extinct dinosaur species just shows how incredible fossil finds such as these are. 3. The death march of a horseshoe crab. The fossils we've explored so far have both been body fossils, the actual physical, usually bony remains of the organism itself. But trace fossils, footprints, fossil feces, or burrows, are another incredible and often better way to gain insight into the lifestyle of an ancient animal, since they preserve the act of the behaviours themselves. But often with trace fossils, it's not actually possible to say with complete certainty which animal made the marks or left the droppings. It's usually possible to say generally which organism could have been responsible, but associating an ichnotaxon, name specifically applied to trace fossils, with their creator's species is a challenge. So it's pretty much a dream come true when a trace fossil gets preserved alongside the creature that actually made it. This is the case with an absolutely astonishing specimen that records the final death march of a Jurassic-aged horseshoe crab. This ancient lineage of chelicerate arthropod is actually still around today, with their basic body plan not having changed a great deal since they first originated. The fossil in question comes from the late Jurassic-aged limestone of Solnhofen in Germany, the same formation from which the famous Archaeopteryx was uncovered, and it was actually Dr. Dean Lomax who studied and described this very fossil with another paleontologist, Chris Racy. At this time in the late Jurassic, this region of Germany was a shallow sea and archipelago, with many small lagoons present along the interfaces between land and sea. The sea frequently washed salt into the lagoons, resulting in the depths of these bodies of water becoming incredibly hypersaline, anaerobic, and deadly environments for any animals that found themselves there. The surrounding lands and seas supported a wide variety of life, including a vast array of pterosaurs, marine reptiles, and of course dinosaurs such as Archaeopteryx. On occasion, these animals ended up in the depths of the lagoons, often after they'd already died and sunk down to the bottom, and the anaerobic conditions down there prevented their bodies from decaying too quickly, resulting in some truly spectacularly preserved fossils. Another of the Solnhofen inhabitants were horseshoe crabs, which seem to have sometimes found themselves trapped in the deadly lower levels of the lagoons due to storms that washed them in. This exceptional fossil specimen was made by a juvenile individual of a species called Mesolimulus walkii, and appears to have been the result of such a storm event. The trackway itself preserves the entirety of this animal's last journey, with the start of the trackway, where the horseshoe crab landed after sinking through the water, being represented by a trampled-looking surface with many imprints made by the animal's legs and tail segment, as well as depressions from the head shield. The arthropod seems to have landed upside down on the sediment before turning itself over and beginning its final march. The tracks go on for an impressive 9.7 meters, with changes in the direction of walking and the increased distress this animal felt as it gradually succumbed to the lack of oxygen being recorded in the marks. Long, straight imprints are actually present between the leg marks and were caused by the animal dragging its spiny tail, or telson, through the substrate. Whenever it turned direction, it then lifted its telson up, but as the tracks near the end, it appears to have lifted its tail up more frequently, seemingly as it was getting disoriented and closer to death. Additionally, there are certain parts of the track that are deeper than the rest, showing that it tried to push itself back up into the water column but was not able to. Eventually, despite its desperate attempts to escape its fate, the young horseshoe crab could last no longer, dying where it lay. The strength of these animals is illustrated by the immense length of its final journey, showing how long it survived in these deadly conditions, but in the end, it was too much for this individual. This absolutely has to be one of the most incredible fossils ever found. The entirety of this prehistoric animal's last moments alive are recorded in this rock, with all sorts of behaviours able to be interpreted from the marks it left all those millions of years ago. A truly stunning example of a moment locked in time forever. 4. The fighting dinosaurs. Having earlier made the point that the Mesozoic world of dinosaurs was not always a constant bloody clash of tooth and claw, it is still true that these animals needed to hunt and kill in order to feed and survive. This is perhaps nowhere better demonstrated than by the famous fighting dinosaurs specimen, probably the most well-known example of prehistoric behaviour preserved in the fossil record. This specimen is an absolutely astonishing discovery. Found during a joint Polish-Mongolian expedition to the Gobi Desert in 1971, it was not realised at first how significant this fossil was for our understanding of ancient behaviour. However, later study of the specimen began to reveal quite how amazing it is. The combatants involved were a small kind of ceratopsian called Protoceratops andrewsi, and Velociraptor mongoliensis, the most famous dromaeosaur of them all thanks to a certain film franchise, though of course in reality Velociraptor was significantly smaller than portrayed in these films. The position of both animals is interesting. The Velociraptor is preserved lying under the Protoceratops, with its left forearm clasping the herbivore's face, potentially in the act of using its clawed fingers to scratch at it. The left foot of the raptor is then positioned close to where the throat of its prey would have been, with this infamous sickle-like claw probably having been utilised to slash at this region in an attempt to kill the animal. However, it certainly was not an unfair fight where the Protoceratops didn't stand a chance. In fact, this small ceratopsian, which actually would have weighed significantly more than the Velociraptor individual, was a fearsome adversary. Despite being clawed in the face and slashed at with the raptor's large ungual, this animal seems to have managed to pin the dromaeosaur underneath it, with it being assumed from the position of the dinosaurs that part of the right leg of the Velociraptor had been trapped under the body of the ceratopsian. Additionally, the Protoceratops very clearly has its beaked mouth clamped down on the raptor's right arm, trapping the predatory dinosaur and preventing it from escaping their now intertwined fate. A few different interpretations have been made by paleontologists over the years as to the exact details of the fight and the events that led to these animals' deaths. Although some suggested that the fossils preserved an example of scavenging behaviour on the part of the Velociraptor, the overwhelming evidence of active predation in the fight put up by the ceratopsian discredits this. The currently most widely accepted idea is that since these dinosaurs inhabited a desert environment back in the Cretaceous, they were fighting near a sand dune which suddenly collapsed on top of them, instantly entombing the animals together, frozen in the last positions they occupied in life. The painful wounds inflicted by each other and the fact that they were likely already exhausted from the battle would have made it impossible for them to escape. Interestingly though, the Protoceratops individual is actually also lacking both of its arms and its left leg, in addition to part of its tail, leading some to speculate that after the dinosaurs were buried, some scavenging of the ceratopsian's carcass took place. It's thought that the limbs and end of the tail of the Protoceratops may have been sticking out of the sand for a while, and that scavengers might have seen this and ended up pulling the exposed parts off the rest of the body. Whatever the exact details, there's no denying that this fight between ancient predator and prey happened. This absolutely astonishing fossil specimen preserves in amazing detail the last moments of struggle, as a hunt went very wrong for the Velociraptor, and the desperate Protoceratops, likely severely injured and bleeding to death, did everything it could to fight back, ultimately taking the raptor down with it. The fighting dinosaurs is potentially one of the best and arguably most dramatic examples of behaviour preserved in the fossil record. 5. Fossilized farts. Finally, we come to some of the most amazingly bizarre fossils that have ever been preserved: fossilized farts. This behaviour, which occurs when gases produced during digestion are released, is found to happen in a wide range of animals alive today, and as such it's safe to assume that a variety of prehistoric organisms would have farted too. Large herbivorous dinosaurs were a good contender that immediately come to mind as they were processing all of that plant matter in their guts, but the fossil evidence we're looking at here actually comes from tiny insects that were trapped in amber. You may be surprised to learn that some, but not all, insects actually fart. In fact, this behaviour is sometimes weaponized, as in the case of a species of beaded lacewing larvae which paralyzed termites with their farts. So it makes sense that some prehistoric insects engaged in this behaviour too. As you're likely aware, thanks to a certain film franchise, it's possible for insects to become stuck in tree resin which then fossilizes and becomes amber, preserving the prehistoric invertebrates inside, often in stunning detail. Well, whilst it might not be possible to find intact dinosaur DNA inside ancient mosquitoes in amber, it is possible, as it turns out, to find farts. And after all, isn't that just a better discovery anyway? The insects in question come from Baltic Eocene-aged deposits and Dominican Miocene-aged ones, and clearly show various different insects with bubbles exiting straight from their rectums. These insects include flying ants, worker ants, termites, stingless bees, and more. And due to the position of the perfectly preserved bubbles, it's very clear what these are showing. It seems that these individuals were probably just about to release gas when they became stuck in the tree resin, and then after death the microbes in their digestive systems carried on for a while processing the last meal they consumed. Then gas was expelled out and into the still soft resin, preserving examples of prehistoric flatulence for paleontologists to marvel at millions of years later. These fossils are actually an incredibly fascinating and unlikely glimpse into the symbiotic association between prehistoric insects and the microbial life that inhabited their intestines. Older Cretaceous amber actually preserving more evidence of this symbiosis has been found too, in the case of a termite that had a damaged abdomen that exposed the various protists living inside the digestive system. These amber discoveries are yet another incredibly remarkable example of prehistoric behaviour locked in time, one that you wouldn't necessarily ever think could be fossilised, and yet here we are. The fossil record, while often frustratingly incomplete, can turn up some absolutely amazing things sometimes. So there we have it, 5 examples of prehistoric behaviours frozen in time. But as I mentioned at the start of this video, if you want to learn about more behaviours in the fossil record, then you should absolutely read my friend Dr. Dean Lomax's new book, Locked in Time. This video has been heavily based on the book, with all these examples being included in it too. However, Locked in Time explores 50 different cases of preserved animal behaviour, not just 5, so there's plenty more for you to learn about in here. This book really is fantastic. It's been in the works for a very long time now, and you can just tell how passionate Dean is about these amazing discoveries and the way he writes about them. I've learnt a lot while reading this book and come across some brilliant and utterly bizarre examples of ancient behaviour that I had no idea about until now, so you're bound to learn some new things. And if you thought some of the examples in this video were strange, just wait until you read this book. I don't want to spoil too much, but there's so much more that I haven't even mentioned in this video. Animals fossilised in the middle of having sex? Yep, we've found them, and you'll have to read Locked in Time to find out more. The book is written in such a fun and engaging way, and it's definitely highly accessible for people of any level of scientific training. Any technical terms introduced in the text are very clearly explained in an accurate but easy to understand way, resulting in an incredibly entertaining and educational read that's obviously been very carefully researched. And it's not just the excellent text that makes this book so unique. Every single one of the 50 fossils featured is also expertly reconstructed by renowned paleoartist Bob Nicholls. These highly accurate and beautiful looking pieces, a few of which you've already seen in this video, are a brilliant way to bring these discoveries to life. And Nicholls' skills as an artist and his understanding of anatomy are clearly demonstrated in these stunning works of paleo art. Accompanying the reconstructed scenes of prehistoric behaviour in action are photos and diagrams of the fossils themselves, which is something I always really appreciate in my paleontology books. Being able to actually see the fossils being discussed for yourself, and then turning the page to see the artistic interpretation is a brilliant way to organise the book, and incredibly important to illustrate exactly what these findings are showing. It's such a unique idea for a book, and the whole topic is an area of paleontology that fascinates so many people, offering an insight into the lives, deaths, and little moments of ancient organisms. These fossils show us how animal life has changed over deep time, as well as how some things have stayed the same and can be compared to modern behaviours, informing reconstructions of extinct animals in all kinds of media. I honestly can't recommend this book enough. It's perfect for anyone who's a fan of prehistoric life of all kinds, and particularly if, like me, you've grown up with paleontology media such as the Walking With or Jurassic franchises and want to see what actual physical evidence we have for how these incredible animals once lived and interacted with each other and their environments. You won't be disappointed. It's a brilliant read. Anyway, thank you so much for watching this video. I really hope you enjoyed it and learned something new. A big thank you to our Patreon supporters too, especially our Dinosaur tier supporters Amanda von Nordek, Archianthus, Bella Anderson, Dhruv Shrivastava, Elijah Carrion, George Vojtek, Greg Silvernail, Just F Max, Corey Peterson, Laura Sanborn, Mike Pace, Persian Boy, Robert Thomas, Staniforth Hopkins, and Tiffany Trammell. If you would like to find out more about our world, its history, and the wonderful life that surrounds us all, please feel free to subscribe to the channel if you think we deserve it, and if you would like to see more from us.